Alright. Hey, cool. We are ons. Hello, everybody. Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Hi, Clive.
Hi.
Hi, Equis. Hi, Jedi.
Hello.
Thank you guys very much for joining us tonight.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so before we start, I do want to make a mention of it. Like, I've always credited Equis as Equis on everything I've done, like including even right now on this stream. The title of this stream actually says featured Equis. But I think for Jedi, you're more comfortable. You're probably more comfortable calling him Leonard, right?
No, I'm fine with both, really.
Cool. All right, then. If we swap in between, I just want, for the benefit of anyone who's listening, that we are referring to Equis as Leonard. This is just going to be a thing, and as sort of a disclaimer and a heads up before we even start anywhere near this conversation.
Yeah, and I doubt any of my British colleagues are listening to this, but then they'll be like, "Who's Leonard?" You know, and they'll know me as Leo, Master, for many reasons. But no.
Yeah, this is going to be a very, very confusing session for all of us. all right, guys.
Oh,
Okay,
well.
Right. Let me just give a little bit of context to this little session that we're having right now here today. So, for those those who are watching right now, most of you guys would probably know me in person. I have a very, very small follower account. But for those who don't, by any chance, I'm actually Malaysian. And one of the things about growing up in Malaysia and everything else, during the times that I did, I'm 34, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. It takes a while because I stopped counting after I hit the big three. I hit the big three, you know. So at that point, there was this phase in life where you were like, hey, I want to do. Games look really, really fun. How do I get involved in the games industry? This looks really, really interesting and all that kind of stuff. And but the problem is that back then, when I was done with my SPM, which is equivalent to the Singapore O levels, there wasn't a clear path to become a game designer. There wasn't game design as a topic choice or as a major. Oh God, let me just pick out.
No.
Oh, he clicked.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, Leonard. Anyway, as I was saying, it wasn't really a subject you could really choose to do in Malaysia. And I think you, at least based on what stories that I've heard so far, it seems like that was also very similar in here in Singapore as well. That having said all that, and all my history, career, blah blah blah, 10 years later, flash forward. What I see now here in Singapore is that you guys have like places like DigiPen and a number of different institutes of higher learning that actually and actively offer game design courses as a major, as a field of study, and it seems that there is no end to the generations that are interested in this as a sort of something to pursue as a career. So that got me really, really curious, because as a person who's never been through the system and had the great fortune of being able to actually work in the industry as a game designer myself, I've always been super fascinated by how game design itself as a course is taught to the general public, or for lack of a better term, the uninitiated. By the way, I'm using air quotes. You can't see. Sorry. So yeah, so that's why I've sort of rallied you guys all here today. Everyone sort of gave me this intro before this, but I'll be honest, I don't think I can do it justice. There really is too much to go through here. So instead of me doing this horrible job at introducing everybody, I think I'm just going to pass the baton off to everyone. Yes, I am cheating, I recognize that. This is sort of host privilege kind of thing. So yeah, Clive, why don't you start and do a quick introduction of yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Jared. Um, first of all, I just said I'm in this mid-career crisis. I'm 42, coming to 42. So it's kind of I made some career changes. So I started off wanted to do games when I was just studying. I love games. I play games since the Atari era, and all the way Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and so on and so forth. Well, I'm like I can say that I'm maybe some sort of a game addict. Well, I want to do games. So when it comes to choosing a so-called tertiary education, so at the time is I guess what? No game course. What's games? No one knows. It's just well, kind of say it's unknown in Singapore. And when you really refer to games, some will just tell you, "Oh, casino games. Oh yes, casino game." No, that's not what I meant. Well, then it started off everything. Okay, why not? Okay, since don't exist, learn myself. So went on try a lot of things. At the time was a Flash, Macromedia Flash, not even Adobe Flash yet. So try to meddle with it, play a bit, do some games, and when I graduate, kind of start a part-time game business, well, to explore a bit. It's I would say it's more like a research and development. We get together like-minded people, and got some interns from Nanyang Polytechnic at the time. I mean, that's the one of the first few game courses in Singapore. So got to explore a bit. At the time, we were looking at mobile games. J2ME. Yeah, it's those monochrome games on a very small screen. So that was it's a bit unimaginable in today's standard. It's like those like games that in monochrome in a very tiny screen. That's like, wow. So started as that, went into some R&D, came out with some prototypes and so on. Well, of course, I'll say it's a very risky business back then, because really no one knows what a game is in Singapore, and there's hardly any resources or support. So of course, do some also. I mean, have another job is go into project management of content development for mobile phones. Some of the those touchscreen you see in Singtel shops. Yeah, so I used to do those, just to manage projects for those, and went on and while part time trying to do that business to build our games. Then after that, when I'll say the games start to have attraction in Singapore with MDA back then. It's called MDA now. It's called IMDA. Promoting games. So it's kind of there's more resources, there's more support. Then they went into a serious games development for practical purpose. The serious games pretty much different from entertainment games, where it's very consumer based. Serious games basically is you're talking about business contracts. You're talking about big lump sum, so maybe per contract 100K and so on. So I'll say it's a more practical way to also get some funding. So went into serious games, did some games, some projects with schools and organizations like the bookstores in Singapore. There's a few, Times, Popular, and etc. And kind of hit a kind of a obstacle in the market. Okay, for this, it may get a bit personal. Steve Jobs killed the market. I was doing flash games for schools, making RPGs and etc. Educational in nature as well. Then Steve Jobs came and said, "We're gonna kill Flash," and Flash died. Things got bad.
This sounds
When
like
a lot of
Clive. This sounds like
Sorry?
you're all in the late 90s. Was this the case?
yes, Yes, it's the late 90s.
Cool.
In fact, I even forgot when Steve Jobs killed Flash. It's like ages.
I feel like for the
Well-
benefit of everyone who did not live through it, and I'm going to go ahead and say that these people actually exist. Like putting a proper
Hello?
timeline for this.
We lived through it, but we were kids then. That's the point, basically. Like, just stop playing that.
Go on. Sorry, Clive, for cutting you off. Do go on.
Yeah, sure. Oh, sure, no problem. Just get a bit funny when I'm talking about the past, like I'm some old man, of course, getting old. Then it moved on to, they kill Flash, and of course, there's some government regulations about digital content and so on. So it kind of, I hit an obstacle that I could not overcome. Not when I've already invested quite a lot into such resources. I'm actually also working with testing some game engines they can go into, but sadly, not in time. Steve Jobs is effective. Well, so I went on. So I got a job. I went into to become a creative director in a card game company. I am not sure if it still exists. I know it existed for quite a while. You know the card game General Orders? Jiangjinling. Something like that.
No.
It's usually the target MOE schools lah. So,
I see.
there's also a very small player base where they get together to actually play it. It's pretty nice game, I would say. So I was a creative director there, working on the marketing, on the general direction of the art, and also liaising with the printer supplier and getting it out and so on. Then after that, I'll say it's a tiring journey. Since the 90s, doing games, success, fail, obstacle, new challenges. Kind of got exhausted at about 30 plus. So that's like about 2002 to 30 plus, close to maybe 10 plus years already. So, okay, time to change my role a bit. I kind of neglect the family also. I feel that, time to change certain direction, When you reach certain age, it's like, family first. Before that is, who cares? Just do whatever you want. So when tried to go into education, so did some training and workshop and did some adjunct lecturing in some private institute. Then eventually I went to a polytechnic, become lecturer, and eventually course manager there. And I've been pushing for game design and the competency. So basically, my main focus is the design aspect, because I feel that when I look at a lot of the courses, there's a lot of courses on the art aspect, on the programming aspect, but design is like a very untouched and unknown channel where I see a lot of courses actually define design as art, some define design as programming. So that's kind of
I have so much opinions about it.
Yeah, I know, right?
yeah.
Welcome to every Chinese
so
New Year
it's kind
gathering. Welcome to every Chinese
So
New
in
Year
fact, I
gathering.
would say
my
now
life.
even design is it's still unknown. It's like a gray area where people are exploring and some people don't even know what is it. So I also see that that's the future going forward. That is necessary because we have a lot of technical skill, etc. But what about the design part? And especially the world is going to user experience. So and games. After speaking with a lot of people in the user experience community, that is not games related, more on the product design and software. Basically, they all have been telling me games is the ultimate form of UX. So, it feels good to know that what you love is actually the ultimate form of the so-called the latest thing in the world. So, kind of just want to go into it, to explore more to it, and plan a restructuring of a curriculum to go in line with that to support the design aspect, so that we have eventually, hopefully, have a talent pool of game designers, not programmers, not artists, but game designers that will use your brain and contribute to the mechanics and user experience that eventually makes a difference in the game product. And that was that. But I've resigned from my job already. So right now, I'm thinking of going back to the game industry and play around a bit. Well, that's about it for me.
Oh, Clive, that is a. I hadn't realized when we met back in, I think, the early, like the early, like, 2000s, and
Yeah,
I think I never knew until now, in fact, that, like, you had all this history with you before this. Thank you very much for sharing all that, man. It has been a very, very long journey for you, hasn't it?
yeah, tiring and long, but enjoyable.
Okay, Leonard, your turn. Tell us your story a little bit.
Okay. Apologies, Clive. I am so grateful that I no longer feel like the oldest one in the room. Sometimes.
Ouch.
To be honest, you're not that much older than me. I mean, like, you were talking about the early '90s, right? And I actually remember it somewhat clearly. And I hope to remember it
Oh,
clearly
I'm
as we
glad.
go along. But yeah, I'm actually
not just talking to myself.
yeah, I wasn't working in the games industry then, and I'm probably just like a year or two, couple of years only younger than you. But not. I mean, I'm not like an entire decade away, or like 2 decades away, which I assume Jedidiah is.
Hello.
But yeah, I mean, I will cut off a lot of parts. But so, unlike you guys, I didn't go straight to gaming, right? But I have a similar story. Like, when I was younger, I wanted to do film. And Singapore at the time also didn't really have worthwhile film courses. You had a bunch of media-related courses and television-related courses, but the kind of film I wanted to study was wasn't as available in Singapore. So I did a bit of course at NUS for a while, but I disappeared into New York for a couple of years to study film. And I think this would be the start of sort of my journey of learning design or learning the craft of it. But suffice to say, I spent about, like, after I graduated film, I spent a couple of years in animation and in broadcast journalism in China News Asia, in a bunch of animation studios here and there. And at some point, I hit my, what's it called, career path, career opportunity. I wouldn't say it was I don't think it was what's the term I'm looking for? I don't know what the term I'm looking for is, but I had the opportunity to switch careers in my back when I was about almost 10 years ago. I had an opportunity, like, when I was actually at CNA, and I was doing a story about emerging markets and emerging industries, and the game industry was a thing. It was coming up, and I was doing a story on it. I was developing a story on it for Chinese Asia. I was developing a series documentary on it. And it's worth saying that even before I had that, where Digipen was a thing, or games education was a thing, I grew up a lot just designing stuff on my own. I made card games on my own. I used to play a lot of RPGs like D&D with my friends, and I used to write a lot of adventure models. Or, some of my hobbies when I was young, like, include, like, back in secondary school, like, I'll draw solid levels. You take A4 paper and you line them up, like, in a line, in a row, and you just draw Sonic levels, which is what I used to do. Like, you didn't have Super Mario Maker back then, but you sit down in class and I'll, like, sketch out on grid paper, or sketch out, like, Mario levels just for the fun of it, right? And I toyed around a lot with early 3D engines, like Quake, the Quake engine, the Build engine when Duke Nukem came out, the Dark engine when Thief came out. So I toyed around a lot with that, and even Source when Half-Life and then Half-Life 2 came out. So I had an opportunity while I was working at CNA to sort of take part in a Digipen professional conversion program, which was basically this 1-year course that the Singapore government was doing this thing, Skills Up Future, and it almost sort of paid you to take this course, but you had to get past an interview first. And I think I did pretty well with the interview, but I did the course. I spent a year basically just like making Left 4 Dead levels and Team Fortress levels, Team Fortress 2 levels, sometimes publishing them. But that's what I did for the whole year. I half pay attention to the syllabus because I half disagreed with it, and I half got into arguments with the Japan professors about it. Didn't bother. Like, I knew what I wanted to do, so I just did it. And it came to mind because the way where I come from, studying film as a craft, like I kind of felt that the way they were teaching game design was, I'm not sure the term is wishy-washy, but it felt like it lacked structure. It lacked, like, they were just telling you to do a thing. And I didn't understand. I didn't. So while I did do the Digipen course, I pretty much self-taught myself. And then I got into the industry, and then I spent the last 10 years in the industry. Here and there, indie, some flirtation with indie, some flirtation with mobile, nothing significant to speak of. But I did spend a long time in AAA at Ubisoft, and am now in the UK as a lead designer in a studio here. So that's where I am right now. So definitely have lots of thoughts about design education. As a lead designer, I find one of the things, and when I was working at Ubisoft, I found one of the things often challenging was working with junior designers who had either studied design or had come through a design program. And I found, like, it's true even here in the UK, that it's a challenge to find designers who come with a core set of skills or core understanding of what design is, because everyone comes with a very different interpretation of design, and it really depends on the school you come from, or in UK, like the country you come from, or the experiences you come from, and everyone has a very different opinion about it, and general different approaches to it. And what I can tell is from, like, even from Singapore, my familiarity with Singapore and my familiarity with the education syllabus here in the UK, so many different syllabuses, so many different ways they approach it. And not all the time useful when you actually start working. So that's interesting. So that's where
I can relate to that.
Leonard, I have to ask though. You mentioned earlier that you spent like a bit of time like screwing around with some level makers, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever spend like hours like during your younger days, right, screwing around with that Nintendo 64 like bike racing track maker thing? Did you ever have that?
No, I'm one of those kids who didn't have a Nintendo. I never had a Nintendo, so I don't have the same Nintendo fondness as a lot of people. I grew up as a Sega kid, which is something. I work for Sega now, so this is kind of nice. But I had a Genesis and a Mega Drive, and they didn't have mod systems. I basically screwed around with a 486 and a PC. I'm not a programmer. Like, give me code and I'm done. Like, just give me a build program, like 3D modeling. I can do that. Like, no, I think so.
Cool. Anyway, all right, Jedi. It is all. It's, by the way, just as a small note, Jedi and I have never spoken before this session before, and it still feels weird calling someone Jedi to me.
Well, that's funny because most people say that they're more comfortable calling me Jedi the first time, so we'll figure.
Yeah, I know, right? I guess this really is a personal thing because
Yes.
the Star Wars IP is so strong in my head that calling someone Jedi feels a bit weirdly pretentious. If you get what I'm getting at.
Oh yes, I am. Yes, my actual title and name is Jedidiah the Skywalker. So yes, you are right. It is very pretentious. Hey, call me whatever you want. I don't care really. Just
Sure.
call
Sure, whatever you want. Yes, I'm going to do my fair share of that jokes as a host eventually at some point. All right, Jedi. Yeah, it's your turn.
me. Okay. Wait, can I just say that, like, I didn't know Leonard was gonna be here. I was literally brought in yesterday, and I thought it was so amazing that I can actually be on the same panel as Leonard. So hi, Leonard.
I pointed Jared in your direction, I think.
Oh, you
Yes, he
did.
did.
Oh,
Yeah.
He definitely.
He was asking for people who recently graduate Digipen, and I'm like, I remember talking to you, and then you had opinions about that. So I'm like,
Oh,
that
yeah.
seems like someone who wants to talk about it.
Yes, that's right. I have opinions about that. Yes, so maybe I'll start from where I am right now, and then I'll kind of start from 20 years ago when I was born. Yes. So
So we're verging facts at this point.
So I'm 28 years old,
Young.
and I currently own my own game studio. It's called AlterCulture Studios. We currently run game design classes for corporate and public. We also do a lot of consultation work for kickstarting game projects. Anybody who wants to start a game project, really. And basically any initiative that helps to evangelize the usage of games, because we're kind of all about that. We see a lot of potential in games impacting everyone and being the newer way to learn and to educate at the same time. So that's where I am right now. How I got here today was quite a twisty path, but it kind of makes sense when I look at the bigger picture. So I started really young. I think I started playing chess when I was about 4 because my dad taught me, and I got really into it. And then my next gateway drug was basically Pokemon cards, where I think I saved up all my recess money and bought all the cards I could, and eventually it became this thing where I distinctly remember putting the card and the board aspect together to start making my own tabletop games out of the materials in front of me. In fact, I've probably never been having any much of exposure to digital games, not until maybe I was much older, maybe about 19 or 20, because, well, my parents just didn't get into it. And as I said, I saved up all my money to buy Pokemon cards, which eventually went into Yu-Gi-Oh cards, which eventually went into, etc. Basically anything that I could hide in a cardboard box away from my parents so that they didn't know about it, but I could still pursue what I liked. But here's the thing, I think one thing that they were very supportive of was that even at the age of 9, when I showed them, hey, this is some game that I created, they actually went to ask a few friends, like, hey, how do we copyright or intellectual property this game? I remember them exactly saying it like that, and their limited understanding, despite that, showed me that they were generally very supportive parents. Then, of course, reality kicks in and PSLE starts, and I think that kind of faded away for many, many, many years. And then after I graduated from A-levels, I kind of was a little bit lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I worked as a personal trainer for 2 years. I was pretty good at it. Ran my own studio, was in charge of about maybe 3 to 4 people and a fair bit of money. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get a degree. So I went to the expo with all the different degrees set out there, and I think it was the SIT one. And I was walking towards the physiotherapy degree booth. And as I was walking towards it, I turned my head left, and I distinctly remember 2 very white men standing in front of the booth that says game design, and they were talking to each other. And I believe those 2 white men are John Duran and Michael Young. And so I walked towards the booth, and I saw the syllabus, and they said, oh, they have board game classes. And I was like, 什么鬼? What is this? Like, this has, this was very new to me. I didn't know that such a degree existed. And I took the booth and I went home. I didn't even go to the physiotherapy booth anymore. I showed it to my parents, and they said that, you know what, this all makes sense. I think, you should go for it. And then that's how it started. So I just went into my game design degree at the Japan, which is probably why I was invited as well. Was there for 4 years, and then upon graduation, that's where I started my company. There's a lot in between, but I suspect we might go into that later anyway, but that's my very brief introduction of how I got here.
Oh, thanks, Jedi. I think it's really interesting how I think you and I share a very similar background in terms of where we started. My interest in game design and game development also as well probably started from trading card games as well. I didn't do much intro on my own, but like Gwen, can you not? Sorry, I'll disregard Gwen's comment on the side. But yeah, I started off. I myself, my biggest introduction to games, more mature games or more complex games, was through trading card games, and it was from a very young age due to a friend of mine who actually taught me how to play BattleTech as a trading card game. So yes, so my first introduction to trading card games was through BattleTech, and not like, say, for example, Magic the Gathering or any of the other more popular trading card games at the time. Yeah, so it's really fascinating. Also, sometimes like right now, as I'm hanging around here in Singapore and like working in the industry, to hear about everyone that's coming out of DigiPen and all their experiences through it, and there is always this huge gap in what I would consider the quality of the batches per student and all that. I've spoken to a colleague of mine who was also a graduate of DigiPen, and he was telling me also about how like the standard of graduates tend to fluctuate quite dramatically. So I think that might be a good place to start us off, because like do you think that this is actually, like, just speaking from your side, Jedi, like, do you think that this is actually something to do with the syllables involved, or is this an issue with like the personality of the people, the generational thing? Because he does sort of phrase this in batches to me, and I'm just curious to know, like, what at least on your first impressions, do you think that would be a factor?
Well, I think first of all, I'd like to ask, like, when you say standard, what do you mean?
Oh, okay.
You know?
So, in a way, like, sort of like when they think about games, right? One common thing that I sort of flag off as a weird, or not necessarily a weird one, but I consider this sort of a sign of your maturity as a game designer, is whether you think about the game more as a game, as a product, as a service on a whole, or are you purely looking at a game from your perspective as a player, you know? So like when you complain about a game, are you complaining about the frustrations of the game that's putting in front of you, without considering like the factors behind it, or maybe there is the larger sort of design intent behind it? Because on my side, we deal with live ops, right? So the company I work for deals with live ops, and that's often the thing that like we think about the most, and when we're trying to gauge on initial candidates initial interview.
Right. That's a tough question, because okay, so I assume that you're kind of saying that, you know, then the standard of a game designer is pretty much defined by how, you know, how good is their critical thinking, how are they able to relate it back to the bigger picture, and not, you know, just the enjoyment part of it as a game designer. I think that in general, I would say that I can only speak for maybe my batch above and one below, because that's really the most exposure I had. I think that, you know, in general, the students that graduate from DigiPen have a decent understanding of what a good game should look like. With that having said, I also think that I can imagine it's quite frustrating, at least in the context of Singapore, to know what your standard is. I mean, how do we define our standard as a game designer in Singapore? Do we define it by the type of game that we produce? Do we define it by the studio that we get hired by, especially in the context of Singapore where there's limited option? You know, how do we know where do we stand? I think it also doesn't help that, at least in the context of Japan, and I hope I'm not too facetious by saying this, I do think that historically there has been a greater weightage on the computer science degrees or the computer science programs of the Japan, and lesser on game design. I think it got better in the more recent years, especially when we have some lecturers, for example, the current head of the department, Rahul Nath. He's really good at, you know, actually encouraging more producers and more game designers to get more exposure and experiences. And definitely versus maybe say like 5 years ago, there's been already a huge improvement for game designers. And so I think as a game designer, I'm glad that I kind of got into the Japan right now as opposed to 5 years ago. But even then, sorry, yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
I'm quite sure Leonard's like, oh god damn it, the background.
No, but I think.
I mean, I've worked as a Japan graduate, so
But
I'll say something different later.
okay, but again, I think like at the end of the day, I still find it such a hard question to answer. Like, who is the one? How do we define what is a good game designer? Who's the one setting that standard, or like how do we actually evaluate a game designer by? Is there even a need to evaluate them that deeply?
I do. I have to do that. That is actually my job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes, of course, I understand that. But and at the end of the day, who are we answering this question to? Are we answering these questions to maybe someone who wishes to poach designers from Singapore and be like, hey, I want to start a company. Should I be hiring designers from Singapore? Right? What's your barometer at the end of the day? And I think that maybe this is where the older titans, or rather my seniors of the industry, can answer better, because they know the big picture of like what people are looking for, and maybe that should be what you define as good. But for me, at least personally, I think if you're able to think critically, if you're able to continually, look at yourself and be wanting to always pursue something more, something greater in your design, and not just stay static where you are, and constantly trying out new types of design, new types of games. That drive that you have, to me, are all characteristics of a really good game designer that I would happily have on my team. And not just be able to do one type of level of design, for example, really well. So I guess that would be my long answer.
I wholeheartedly agree with Jedi. I think if you're defining the standards of a good designer as someone who's open to new experiences, who's open to critically analyzing their own approach to design and understanding the kind of things that they do, I think that is one of the key traits of a really good designer, or even a competent one, if I was go as far to say. Like, even a competent one has to be aware that there are more than one type of games, there are more than one type of ways to do a thing, and how do you do it? Right.
Yes.
I believe I can add to that actually. In fact, I can say that it's not just about thinking on the aspect of in the game industry, but also from the education industry. Truthfully, when I first go into education as a lecturer, I am like teaching teaching my experience in industry, teaching other people's experience in industry. So that was when I can still say that I was from the game industry. I am still in the game industry. But once I transit into full education, full time, I still have that mentality until I took a Masters of Education. So that was it's a local master by NIE, but it was tweaked to focus on vocational education. That's where I start to realize I was very ignorant. I may know the game industry, but I'm ignorant about education. So that's where something has been introduced to me, and in fact, this answer about what makes a competent designer is something I've been searching for the answer for a very long time, and I seems to able to discover so-called some traits, some leads that will actually answer the question. So it lies with this concept of competency. So we talk about, in fact, just now, what Jedi and Equis talk about. I would say, talk about the ability to think, to analyze, and so on. Those are actually competencies. Just that a lot of competency, a mix and match of certain competency will make a competent, game designer. So the thinking skill, the brain, is actually one of the soft skills that is I'll say usually ignored at least in Singapore, because I think Singapore there's a lot of focus on hard skill, things that are tangible, but not really a thinking skill. But nevertheless, those are competencies.
Sorry,
So
Clive, if I may, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, if my understanding's a bit off here, but what you're saying is that from an educator's point of view, right? There are metrics. The metrics have been defined at least from at least at your level, and you're saying that there is a lot of emphasis on the technical side of things, but not as much on the other factors, like the other competencies that you're talking about, like the soft ones that you were mentioning just now, at least within the system. Is this correct? Like, there is a bunch of checkboxes
yes,
that's
in
defined
general,
in education already. All right, that's I think that would be news for.
it's not actually.
Sorry,
In
go
fact,
on.
I'll say it's not even properly defined education.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
So
I have a question
education.
to follow up on that.
it-
But,
Alright.
that is,
Let it go ahead.
no, I was gonna let Clive finish first.
All right.
I had a question about like, in general, like how much the games industry, or at least a related industry, has input onto those educational competency, for lack of a better term, KPIs. Like,
Metrics,
if
right?
the education, metrics. Who's setting those metrics for what? For what the industry is looking for
Right.
from the education side. When I was working at Ubisoft, we did set a few certain very small, very very small, because Digipen is almost practically runs their own thing. But we did set a few certain key factors in terms of like how to define what a good design syllabus should encompass.
Yep, you hit the nail. Now that's the problem. That's the biggest problem in Singapore. So when I took the masters, then I became a course manager of one of the diplomas. That's what I realized. I look past documents. I look on all the industry engagements. Basically, a lot of these checkboxes. In fact, I'll say that even the word competency in education is a new thing. So a lot of people are focusing on like I'm sure you're quite familiar is let's just teach the subject. So the subject is programming. You don't talk about competency, you just talk about completing the subject. Teaching you about what is programming, move on. Are you competent in programming? Don't know. It doesn't test you that. So basically the word competency, I'll say that is actually derived from work. So actually it's a competency in vocational education. Competency, when you have them, all this competency mix and match in the right order will make you able to do your job in the industry. So competency is never an academic term, it's actually derived from industry. So education generally in Singapore, when now I'm looking through, or rather at a time when I was a manager in a course, well, I have to do competitor analysis, of course, looking at all the courses, etc. I do realize that competency is never a thing. So end of the day, it will never accurately translate to so-called job functions. It simply translates to knowledge, that's all. And how is it used? Well, no one's touching that. So that is what I discovered. Sorry?
Which is an interesting debacle, I think, because in my opinion about design is that design is not a knowledge-heavy skill set. Like design.
Precisely.
And I come from someone who uses a lot of my film education to drive the way I learn design. And this is why the biggest thing I always tend to say was, my frustration with the way design is taught as a whole, is that they teach it not as they don't teach it as knowledge, because it's not really a knowledge thing, but they don't teach it as the way they teach design is almost a sort of like philosophical approach, which I think is wrong, which I think is generally misguided. So they teach you philosophies of design, right? Whereas I come from film, and when in studying film, the way they teach you film, everything about film and everything about storytelling and cinematography, they teach it as a craft. So they teach you want to do this thing, here's the 8 ways you can do it. Pick the one you feel like the best or the one you understand the most. And throughout my 10 years of experience as a designer, both primarily as a level designer, where level design is an incredible amount of craft coming together, I think design is a craft. There's a lot of craft in design, and if you've spoken to people who talk, we had a sort of chat about this before this, right? Like you were nitpicking Jared a little bit. Like UX is a craft, right? Like graphic design is a craft, like saliency is a craft, like things about font choices or where you organize your information, how you compose and separate your graphic to provide a better piece of information. That is a craft, right? But we don't teach, and from my understanding, design is never taught as a craft. Design is taught as a philosophy, and I think that's wrong.
I love how one
So that is
issue.
the problem actually.
Sorry. I was gonna say that I love how one
Sorry, Jared.
like one really bad design just sparked everybody.
Wasn't bad. I actually didn't mind. Like if you went with that, I'm like, that's fine. But Clive started the ball, and I'm like, yep, I'm sorry, he didn't bring it up. So I'm like, he's right. So
for the benefit of anyone, like everyone
Well, I
else
mean-
who is listening, right? Just really for the benefit of everyone else who's listening. The final one reason why the promo image went out so late was because everyone on this panel had feedback on it, and I was like, holy crap, a lot of this feedback is super legit. I'm going to do something about it. And it took me like 6 hours to get all of it done, like quote unquote properly. And even then it's not fantastic.
it's really good now. So there you go.
this was
It works. It's more effective.
this just so you know, this was the stuff that I was planning to do during December to like plan out the CI for like this channel and everything else. But you know what? No, we're going to do this right now.
Well, it's just interesting.
Well, actually, if I may offer a perspective that
Yes,
I guess
definitely.
more from the education side of things. I think Clive mentioned competencies, and he's right. I mean, it comes from the competency frameworks that exist in many organizations right now. I'm quite familiar with this because I have an HR person in my team, and I specifically pick her to be on my team because one of my biggest questions was, how do we actually define what is a game designer, right? And I kind of consulted her to find out, hey, how has HR been performing in Singapore? How do we set standards for other occupations, and how do we actually apply that to game designers, for example? And that's something I'm currently working on. But I also relate it back to my experience in Japan. And I'm sure if there are any Japan students who are hearing this right now, like we can all relate to the freaking rubrics that they give us for this module called GAM, G-A-M, which is our yearly portfolio project. It's a 6-month thing. We work in a team, and we have the programmers and the artists and the designers that come together, and we work together to produce something really amazing, and hopefully that looks nice on our portfolio and we get hired because of that. And I think like when we just mentioned what the critical ingredients are for a good game designer, I often find that there is a little bit of a contradiction in the way that we are being assessed. And I do understand that this is going into the territory of the problem of the education system, how you cannot realistically or practically assess someone on how good they are or not, but at the end of the day, I can go into this. There's so many layers, right? Like we pay 40K to come into the university. We want to get a job. So we think, okay, well, we just have to get through it and we get a degree, and that says that we are a decent game designer. And how do we get that degree? Well, we have to pass all these projects. Given how much emphasis is being put on this specific game project, I better jolly well score as high as I can on this project to show that I'm a good game designer. Yes.
Jedi.
Yes.
Because I never went through. I didn't go through the Japan's
Yeah.
project system like
Yeah.
that. But I went through something similar. How do they then rate those projects? How do they guide you and rate you through those projects? What's the syllabus course in terms of? Is it just do this project, or is there a way? Is there like facilitation or guidance when you go through these projects, depending what types of projects you're doing?
Well, okay, yeah. So I think the assumption is that you would have taken other relevant courses or modules alongside this big project module, right? So I would have taken, say, all the game design 200 courses before I do project 200. And so ideally, because I've learned all the different game design skills from my other modules, I will be applying it back to this bigger project that I'm collaborating with the other disciplines. And in the rubrics itself, you do have a section that's dedicated to each of the disciplines. So, for example, if we built in Digipen, we actually built all our engines from scratch. At least during my time, most of it is being built from scratch. And so, if I'm a programmer and my engine bugs out, right, the designer is not going to be penalized for it. It's going to be the programmer. However, there's also a little bit of a trickle-down effect, right? Imagine if the engine doesn't work, well, then that's the engine limitation. And as a designer, it'll be a lot harder for me to express what I want when I could have just maybe gone with Unity and done it all on the spot, right? So even though I'm technically not assessed based on the technology, my ability to show or experiment ideas is definitely affected. And I also this is kind of like a slight detour, but I do think it's relevant. I think there's a slight contradiction between design and being assessed like that. In design, it's all about failure. Like if we master our craft, it's because it's an accumulation of multiple iterations of failure over and over again. I'm not sure how many failures I can have for $40,000.
Yeah, but you'd be
Yeah.
surprised at how often that is also true in the industry, where engine choice and finding the right engine.
Right.
And I have these I've had this argument a couple of years ago on this particular project that I'm working on. Can't be think, but it's basically like, do you want speed? Do you want clarity of engine, or do you want like speed of prototyping? And then you have to make these decisions. And your $40,000 is your own money in terms of your education. Like at the studio level, we're talking like several million, depending on which engine we choose, because it becomes that much of an investment and that much of a we have to decide to do this. For this project and probably for the future of the studio.
Right.
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 And then you make those decisions, and then we make those decisions, and then people higher up than me who sign my paychecks will have to make those decisions. I just give them information.
Right. Exactly. I agree. But and therefore, I mean, I think I'm not. That is completely right. But I think I can imagine anybody who is in that moment in school. That's why they have such a difficult time on deciding whether they are on the right path of being a good game designer or not, because you have all these pressures around you that's really preventing you from exploring yourself as a designer. The way that you're doing is skewed by whatever the rubrics demands. And yes, there's the thing where when you get into the industry, it's going to be similar as what you just said and all that. But then I wonder if that also brings it back to the maybe a bigger problem in the industry itself of how we are using designers in the projects, right? The whole is the designer just the means to an end? It's just a tool, and at the end of the day, especially if you're involved in much bigger projects, how much agency do they have over their craft? Maybe that is why I ended up not joining any studio, and I started my own because I'm a bit too stubborn and I don't want to be tamed by anybody. There are so many layers there. I'm not putting any value judgment on any piece of the puzzle. I'm just kind of highlighting how, as a student at that level, before you get out into the industry, your sense of how good you are as a game designer is already very warped, and you don't know what competencies are correct or to stay true to yourself. Like what is the competencies of a true game designer versus what the industry wants, because we're going to manufacture the same thing over and over again until we drain every single dollar. There is that debate that I have.
I will say one thing before I would want to ask Clive his experience in education, because I think what you described is somewhat true. And like I've spent some time wondering wondering or talking to the UK school systems, because they don't have a DigiPen here.
Mm,
They have several. They have several universities. University of Edinburgh, Teesside, King's College, that do have a game design course.
Yes. Oh, I'll let you continue, but I just want to like tell everybody out there. And I heard about I think there was one of the schools that was like funded by no, not Ubisoft, EA, and I learned that in their third year they learned how to write a business plan. Like, oh my god, I would want to, I when I heard about it, I was so excited that you
Yeah,
can
that's probably Teesside.
right.
Teesside does that.
Yes.
Well, I think it's because Teesside is one of those few universities that has quite a lot of so my studio, Creative Assembly, is involved there. EA's Criterion Studio is involved there.
Right.
Sumo, which is a really big UK, I know they have like 7 studios across the entire UK, is very involved there. They have a better education syllabus, I think, but what you describe as in designers being there, what makes a good designer, and your vision of it is warped, isn't very different from the graduates and the junior designers that we get, or when I have to mentor them. So everyone knows you have to do a project. Everyone sort of knows that if you want to be a designer, you have to have something in your portfolio, board game, level design, an idea of some sort. And so they're very skewed in terms of thinking of making a project. But and I say this as someone who hires designers for often a lot. Like often the very few of them are also then good at articulating a process, which is where I usually put a mark off as a good designer. Can you articulate your process? Yes, probably a good designer. No, and this is where most fall down. They can't articulate their process. They just kind of do. And I always suspected that that's because the education system basically just says, do this project, lets you loose, and then tells you whether the project is good or not. But not work you through the process how you got there.
Well, I have to definitely agree on that. Anyway, just to I actually whatever Jedi says resonated well with me as well, because I was actually for 1 year I was actually in the advisory committee of DigiPen for game design. So whatever that you said, in fact, I know Rahul used to be my colleague in education. So I would say that this is something I don't quite agree with regarding what you said about the game engine and stuff. That I attributed to I would say not even beyond design, project management, or basically the producer part of things. So end of the day is every course that I know of in Singapore, at least, they have already predefined so-called production direction. So let's talk about project management. Okay, I'm going to the really high end of the management stuff. Okay, in fact, most schools still work on this notion of waterfall project management. If you are familiar with that,
Yeah.
have you heard? So waterfall is predominant, already is in a lot of in the syllabus in Singapore. Very few of them will employ agile, which is about prototyping and such. And from what I understand is everyone is looking forward to agile. So
the joke
but
about
end of the day,
game design,
I mean agile project development in general, Scrum, etc. So end of the day is when you talk about education, you talk about the syllabus. Everyone is talking about what a designer should be, but usually ignores, okay, so what is my production direction? Because the production direction will actually determine what sort of designer is needed. For example, like I've stated about game engines, existing game engines, and basically designer is a set of restrictions that's already placed upon designers that they have to work around it, that they have to fit. I'll say see how the skill will fit to make the best use of the game engine. Compared to another approach, let's say you start a project from fresh. It's a totally new game. You use existing engine that is made for designers. In fact, I would say Unity is a designer-friendly engine.
Mhm.
Not exactly debatable, but compared to, let's say, you code an engine straight C++, create your own engine, or old engines like Torque or even Unreal Engine, it seems that Unity has a lot of things that already, I'll say, put in place for designers, a lot of tools for designers. So now the question is, what if these tools are not available? But that all depends on your company direction, your project management direction, and in education is which project management direction you chose. So in fact, that becomes a big issue when, let's say, if the school or whoever came up with the syllabus has little knowledge about project management, and you just assume that, let's say, I put in an engine or put in certain process, that is so-called the norm, but a lot of time it's not.
I agree wholeheartedly with Clive here. No, I was gonna say I agree wholeheartedly with Clive here. I was gonna nitpick about Unity and Unreal, but that's beside the point really. But yeah, one of the core problems with design, and one of the few things I found myself having to always unteach designers is for designers to unlearn is what is the process and how do we manage the process goals of design. Far too many design, especially in Singapore. The UK has less problems with this in general, but I have encountered it a little bit here as well. Far too many designers or designers without broad experiences will always approach everything as a waterfall. And so they'll plan out stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. They'll plan out all the way up to beta. And I'm like, at stage 2, I'm like, yeah, but your stage 1 hasn't even been proven. But my timeline is done. I've already put all my Jira tasks. It's already completed. Someone already wrote done. And I'm like, but it's not fun yet. What do you want me to do? Like, I'm not going to sign off on this. It's not fun. I'm not going to release this. And the joke about game industry is that we often try agile. So I'm Scrum trained. I am Kanban trained. We don't actually use agile that either, right? We are like an unholy Frankenstein monster of waterfall because we have money, but with occasional agile processes. We call ourselves Scrum but this, or Kanban but. We do Kanban a little bit, but that, and then it becomes incredibly different. Like different departments are very different. Design especially has to be very agile, but animation can't. Like if you define it, like animation is very waterfall. Some engine code is very waterfall with a lot of agile processes put in just in case, because you need to deliver. Anybody who's worked on tech or network or code, who has to deliver you games as a service, like what you're working on, Jared, is like that. There has to be a very strict waterfall process in place for you to get proper network code.
Yeah.
Or you don't get it.
Yeah.
Right. But
exactly.
design has to straddle that line between both. Yeah. And often what you find is people who don't know that one or the other. Right. What is the process? How do you get from one to the other? Where do you draw the line? How do you design that?
Yep. There's a very sorry, I was going to just say that there's going to be a really, really long and very, very different discussion, right, about the waterfall process used in live ops games. But yeah, I before Jedi, I know you want to say something. I just want to toss a question to Leonard first before we go off, because the topic might change along the way. Gwen was asking, you mentioned about good articulation when you were talking about designers, right? I just want to just as a quick check-in, like, does that mean that in order to be a good designer, right, you need to have a good command of the language that your studio uses predominantly?
Talking about like spoken language, like English, not. I don't think it's really about that. I think part of it, like I have a good designer who's really not great at public speaking, right? But his documentation is clear and to the point. So that is that. Okay. And during interviews, I can fully understand when people just get super nervous and can't articulate well. But there's a lot of little tricks in terms of like going through an interview process for how you do things. So one of my favorite tricks, or one of my favorite guys, would be like sometimes we leave papers and pens. Not back when we could meet in person and not like kill each other. You leave papers and pens, and then you just pose them a design question and you see what they do, right? How how do they they don't have to describe the process, right? They just have to act it out. You know, someone said I want to do this, and then he'll just start sketching and scratching, or he'll like you know. And I've went through a lot of design interviews when I was like moving around a bit. Sometimes these aren't like single interview sessions, right? A few studios, almost every studio I know will assign a design test. Some will take a day, some will take a week. Sometimes you write essays. For one particular design studio, I had to do up. It took me a week, but I had to do up presentations, like presentations on a particular design topic, my directions and my analysis of it, as on a whole. So the topic was open world, and then I had to break down practically my entire knowledge of open world design across more things. And then you start articulating that. And I think if Gwen's question was what is good articulation, it's can you describe the process that you do it, and you know, that you do design, and how do you handle feedback, how do you handle changes in direction, how do you handle new ideas, how do you handle playtest feedback,
Okay.
and all these things. Yeah.
Right. So
Can I share something
yeah, go ahead,
regarding
Jedi.
to this?
Yeah, go ahead, Jedi.
Oh, thank you. Actually,
Oh, sorry, Clive. Was it? Sorry. Sorry. I think Clive was. I'm sorry, Jedi. Can we just like give
Yeah.
Clive a quick? I am so sorry. This is a
It's okay.
issue on my end. Yes, Clive, go ahead.
Sure, no problem. Anyway, this is something, it's an experiment that I did. It's quite interesting. But in the education sense, a lot will term me an underdogs, but I would call it necessary. So actually, I wrote a module on that, on basic serious games, negotiation, and such. So basically, it's the competency on articulation and communication. So I have, in fact, I did something of scenario, kind of a quest board, something, just having some fun in the classroom. A quest board basically is a real life scenario. Let's say this organization would like to have this game done, etc. Will have this objective, and it has a tech value up to it. Let's say investment value of maybe 100,000, there are 10,000. So basically, students will get to pick so-called as a group. They work as a group, pick which so-called order they will want to fulfill. Something like your guild quest board, something like that. So basically, the criteria is very simple. It is not about specific things that you do. The idea is as long as you can communicate your ideas to your client and convince them, you are good to go. And that's my interesting, I'll say, observation. Okay, when this is a year 3 module, that means they're going to graduate soon. Whenever they go into this module, the first reaction is like, no, you have to tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. Tell me what I should use. Then my answer will be, think what is appropriate. What do you think can help you best communicate? You do not need to speak. You may not need PowerPoint, you may not need whatever, but whatever that helps you communicate across. So I'll say that this one problem that I noticed. A lot of students are institutionalized to believe that there is certain way of communication that is so-called the only way that they can communicate across. But unknown to them, there are tools. There are a lot of tools up to them at their disposal. And so that's one interesting point from that module. End of the module, students are coming up with possible even performance, video presentation, or I'll say even so-called interactive PowerPoint, and whatever they take to get this message across to the client. And basically they're graded for basically how they communicate, but not the channel of communication, which is what I'm trying to focus at. Is a lot of education select in their syllabus selected so-called a channel of communication that the student must use. Be it that is it the best way that they communicate, or be it that is the most effective for them, that's not apparently the concern, but they have to use that channel, which I see that possibly is what perhaps makes communication fail, because once you're not used to it, or once you're not given this channel in real life, you're like, okay, I'm stuck. I've not come across this, so how am I going to do that?
Sounds like education can be a little bit agile itself.
I remember talking to you, Jared, some time ago. I said, if you had your chance to overhaul the education system, the one thing you do is make everyone write an analysis. Was it a critical study of a game?
Yeah.
Yep. I think this is, I think, you know, and I remember thinking that's really useful. I wonder if that's too academic or really useful. But like I said, I came from film, right? And not only did I come from film, I actually came from science. And one of the things science we had to do when I had to graduate science was you had to defend a thesis, right? So you spend like 6 months gathering data, writing up your argument, and then at some point you take that thesis and argument up to a panel of professors who are all determining your graduation and then argue your points, and they will attack you like mercilessly. Again, depending on how well you get to know them. You know, it's always the ones who are friendlier to you, more merciless to you. I don't know if this is a process that designers go through, and I do tend to find, again, this is mainly from my personal experience. You get a lot of designers who are not comfortable doing this because they're too invested in the idea and too invested in, yeah, they're really invested in the idea but not invested enough, or not competent enough in defending that idea. Like one of my creative directors used to tell me, like, you know, being a designer at certain levels is a lot like being lawyers. You have to argue your case and you have to make your case, and you have to find your witnesses and find your supporting evidence to make your case before we commit to it. Because if we do and it turns out wrong, we have to be understanding like that cost us time, money, people. So you know, at a certain level of design, it really is a lot about presenting, arguing, and defending. You know, oftentimes, which, you know, sometimes makes what you do, you know, like, you know, we have data metrics so much easier. Like, I don't need to change this. 70% of players love it. That's fine.
Well, okay, Jedi, I've been holding you off for a long time. I'm actually very, very curious on your thoughts on this. I'm quite sure you have a
No,
lot of things you want to
I was going to
say.
say that they all brought up very valid points, and I was trying to draw it back to the whole thing about current games education. And I think when I brought up the example about the whole like waterfall thing, I wasn't trying to say that is a pain point that we need to fix per se. If anything, I was just kind of expressing the types of feelings felt at a point of time as a student that looking back, I obviously feel different today. But again, part of the process of becoming a game designer as a student is that my point was that you need the space for it. As they have brought up, you need to be able to, have the space to debate, to defend, to convince. You also need a space to fail. I think that the current education space does not provide it, assurance that, hey, if you fail, if you'll be okay. It's part of the process of learning. In here, it feels like if I fail, that's it. And then I have to repeat a year and etc. etc. I mean, and on top of the fact that, and again, this is very, very like contextualized within the realm of my experience in Digipen. I want to caveat to everyone out there so that I don't get my ass sued. That I'm not talking about current Digipen because I've left almost a couple of years. And also, other schools may do it differently, right? But I definitely felt that there wasn't enough safety for me to fail. To some extent, I did try to push the limit, but at the end of the day, I was also working with a team and convincing them that, hey, maybe y'all don't want to take on like 6 modules at the same time while doing this huge game project. There's already a difference in the dedication to the project that you're working on. Again, one can argue that, hey, then that's also part of the process, right? Everybody has a different workload, different objectives, and it's your job as a producer or a game designer to ensure that you can convince all these people to be aligned with you, or at least you have somehow struck out a happy medium. I agree. I totally agree. And I think part of the reason why it was possible in my time to do that is because Rahul himself put a lot of emphasis on the need of a good producer. In fact, I think it was a year after I did the GAM project, they started to have a lecturer dedicated to just project management, which, I think was not very common before that. They even had weekly meetings with all the producers. Well, no, Rahul did that with my group, but he made it even more prominent in the following year to train all the producers, and who were mostly game designers by background, by the way, to actually come together to report and share what they have been facing, And that all those were really good practices. I'm just saying that the culture of it is as important in the institution for you to be able to explore yourself as a game designer. I don't think that culture is as ideal as it could be. Then again, in Singapore, it's a very
I agree. I totally agree.
yeah. So I think all of you pointed really good points of why it makes you become a good designer, but I think that was never what I thought was an issue. It's like, actually, how do we get there? How do we shape our current landscape such that, there is a balance of, I am going to have a relatively, secure future versus, after I graduate, versus like, can I learn the best as I can and sharpen my craft authentically as I can in this university? And I think that might be an inherent contradiction in that, because when it comes to design, as I said, it's all about failure. So perhaps security is something you should never, place too much priority on. If you want security, go and do finance. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, you say finance. Finance is much bigger.
Yes, that too. But with it's, if you have too much security, there's no innovation. There has to be,
design is an aesthetic. You have to fail.
Yes.
Often.
Yes, you have to.
That's the question. That's the question I have though. It's like, again, I spend majority of my life in Singapore, so I completely understand the feeling, even though I have practically rejected it most of my life. Is that sense? Is it that sense of like the fear of failure? Often, is that what permeates the education in Japan or where Clive was? Is that something that happened? Like, was it so? Again, I studied in the States, right? And people there were ambitious. They didn't worry about failure. Like that, they would do ambitious failures, like complete catastrophes, right? But they never worried that it would be a failure. They just did it. That's Americans. The British are a bit more conservative in that regard. But in Singapore, I often came across like, I don't want to do that just in case it would fail. And I'm like, that's not how good design comes. That's not, do a thing. See if it fails later. Do a thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
go ahead.
that is the scary part, actually, because basically, and when I was teaching, basically I focus on process grading. So the result, I'll say, is still good, but end of the day, I need the processes to be done right. So in terms of, let's say, design, communication, your prototyping, the various stage of your documentation also, not just your end of the day, you just send me one whole big document of everything you've done, but your weekly reports, your weekly documentation, all this in the process. So end of the day is, I have a lot of students coming to me that actually asking me for the way out. And I say, I want to know your process. I want to know how you fail. I want you to articulate to me how you fail. Why do you think you want to change the design, and so on. And I got quite a lot of response as such. Clive, you have to understand, I have to get good grades. So basically, I cannot afford to fail. So please tell me, how can I get the grades? That's totally okay. Basically, that was a shock to me. Even although you are graded on your process, on how you articulate your failure, but yet they want just the shortest path to success, which is what is the most optimum way to get the grades.
The context of without the details, was this poly or which university or
Poly.
is it, or just general?
Poly, at least general poly in the poly landscape is what I hear about. So usually I do not. Usually those who are very open to ideas or very basically not afraid of failures are usually the renegades. Those who would like to try new things, that doesn't care about results. To them, it's just they want to enjoy the process. So those turn out in the so-called educational sense, let's say in the result-driven kind of education sense, they are the bad students, which I feel unfair for them, because they are the one that make a difference next time, because they are willing to explore, willing to take risks, but yet the traditional system, education system of only looking at result, penalize this group of people, but give credit to those who don't think but just wants and only care about the answer.
So even though you were grading on the process, so was it like most of your grading was weighted to how well they did the process versus how well the project turned out?
Yes.
And even when
Yes.
even when you were doing this, they were more concerned with how well the project turned out.
Yes, because to them they are not used to this concept of process grading. It's almost like an alien thing to them. To them, if I'm not mistaken, this is the predominant educational system before the polytechnic. Is all about results. I know that now in the secondary school, primary school, there's a shift of education to focus more on process, but at least during that batch and batches before, the education system is very focused on results. So when you talk about process, to them is they couldn't understand what is called grading your process. They do not understand this word, a thought process. They only know what is called a result.
But that's interestingly challenging because I can't work with people who don't know how to articulate their thought process.
Okay, all right, guys.
I mean, I've worked with people like this before. I'm not saying I've never worked with people like this before. I just find it really, really difficult to.
Yeah. All right, guys. We're running into our limits right now, but I think I do want to throw sort of a question out there for all three of you guys. And keep in mind that this is not a short or long answer kind of question. This is just sort of a summation from the topics that we've discussed so far. And I want to very much start off this question, quote unquote question, based off Jedi's experiences as well, the ones that you were sharing about GAM and stuff like that. Because I'm as a Malaysian and as a guy who's never been through a quote unquote formal education process for game design and all that kind of stuff, it's really interesting that that DigiPen actually puts their students through sort of this cross expertise, cross major project making style, where you have like this bunch of people who are majoring program and then this bunch of people who are majoring art, who work together on one final year project kind of thing, right? And I feel that that's definitely something that's very unique. It gives a near real life experience for anyone who's interested in pursuing a career in games development, whether it's in design, art, or programming, or any other form for that matter. And I think you put it to quite a bit of emphasis as well about how important the producer is in this role. But that's kind of really insane, isn't it? Where you have a bunch of students who are from all different backgrounds. No one signed on to say for example, this isn't a case where you're like, oh, I joined a company, the company's culture doesn't fit for me, I can step away from this, or I get, worst case I'm fired, or any other case like that. This is a case of I'm going in for educational studies, I'm here to learn everything else, but I'm stuck in this process where everyone else has a different level of dedication or commitment levels or expectations than me. This is of course painting the worst case scenario. While the intent of this obviously is to give a real life experience, and I think is to sort of prepare them through sort of just tossing them into the fire, like how Leonard and Clive has so beautifully pointed out, to give them that kind of experience where if I was just teaching you knowledge, you wouldn't be able to pick up on, right? You need to go through it and like learn and fail and everything else. But of course, because there's this huge fear of everybody who's involved in the process of going like, oh, if my FYP looks like shit, I'm just gonna get a bad grade, that's one side of it.
Can I just make one,
Yeah.
one more thing about
Yeah,
this? As a guy who hires designers, I never look at grades.
Yeah.
I do not care. I do not care. I do not care whether you got A's or B's.
Yeah,
I will look at your project. I will look at the project sometimes, like
Yeah.
and if the project looks good, great. If the project looks bad, okay, it's fine. But if you're already past the door, I'm going to ask you a lot of things about why you did this or how you did this,
That's
or what you thought about doing this, what your favorite game is, why do you like your favorite game, what part of your favorite game do you not like, what part would you improve, what are your ambitions. I do not care about your transcript.
Yeah. Okay, so
I've never once asked
Guess
person about
what's
trip.
that would be, I think, very, very
actually
useful.
there's a very sad part about this actually.
Well, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'm
Maybe
sorry, guys.
just
Clive, I'm sorry, but I do want to try and finish this point off first before, like, you
Sure,
run
sure,
too
sure,
long,
sure.
because Jedi has a time.
Yes.
oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was getting at was that so there's obviously a intended output, like intended experience from this whole thing. It's for you to learn to be able to fail, but at the same time, because either everyone is so afraid of failing by conditioning, like from their life and everything else there is, or if not, it's just the general idea that you'll be graded based on the final result. That's going to be one concern. Put that in box. There's also the other concern whereby if you are in a group, a large enough group, the slackers will fade off into the background, and those who really push themselves would like, hey, what's the point kind of deal. Whether that demotivates some people, that's a very big question that I don't know whether we can address today, but that is just a box that I want to put onto for consideration. And through it all, through this entire process of GAM and everything else, and as Clive has so beautifully brought up as well, do you think that because you have a limited amount of time, and everyone has a limited amount of time with any project for that matter, that people tend to like be more focused on the final result of it all, and as some of the guys were putting it, like what my final grade is going to be, rather than to go through that process of experimentation and failure and all that kind of stuff that everyone seems to have put a lot of emphasis on as something important in games education. So yeah, so that's the question. Jedi, your thoughts, if you don't mind.
Could you repeat that last part?
So like, because of all these factors that we brought up, right? Like the issues with like because you're stuck in a process that first and foremost you don't have a choice to choose. You don't have a choice in. You're stuck in it.
Yeah.
You're stuck with a lot of people who have different levels of commitment and stuff like that. And sometimes it may feel like even if you push yourself further up higher and all that kind of stuff, it won't result in anything. You're just going to get like lost in the weeds of everybody else. And also on top of that, because it's so result oriented, right? That you don't really see you're just generally disincentivized. You feel like you're disincentivized, right, from experimenting, from doing that feeling thing that everyone here is talking about. Yeah.
Well, I think in my case, at least with my GAM group, I think we definitely actually tried something different, and I can safely say that we were not the best game, and I don't regret it. But and the reason why I don't regret it is because I tried. But I do also recall seeing quite a few games that were quite formulaic, and I didn't see them as necessarily pushing something different. And I don't blame them, at the same time, because as I said, there are so many factors, right? And for example, let's not mention the fact that if you are a programmer, right, and if your goal is actually more to get into a company for that is more computer science related than actually games related. And by the way, there was another issue. Like there were quite a lot of students that upon graduation, they didn't actually go to games companies. A lot of them actually went to the more techie or banky ones. And I guess because it's more stable and whatever. I do think that indirectly influences the motivation that you have going into the project. And that is very different, say, going into a game studio where everybody there is, they know that they're there as that's their job. They're there to make a game, and you also have at least some sort of like HR framework that ensures that if people get complacent, they can get fired. And I really recall that in the Digipen America, which is in Redmond, I'm not sure if it still stays true, but their process for GAM was actually different from the Singapore one at that time, where the America one, you could actually fire people and some, and there were some consequences, but it was definitely not as big of a consequence as they did in the Singapore Japan at the time. And so even the idea of firing someone was such a huge blow, right? Think about the fact that how you are already doing this with 4 or 5 other modules. if you fire one person in your team, especially if that team is maybe the one or the other programmer, but you can't get rid of him, and that's going to result in failure, right? So all these factors, they are different for different groups, and and that's what I meant, right? I would have wished that maybe there was a semester where everybody is forced to do nothing but that one game module, for example. It may not be practical, but I think that at least ensures that there's a higher chance that, well, you're here, you've got nothing else to do. So if the designers wanted to actually experiment and try something different, they have some level of assurance mentally that, hey, I am given sufficient resources to do so in a learning environment. So that's what I wish it could have been a little bit more like, I think, as a student. Yeah.
Leonard, how about you? I'm doing a reverse thing, by the way, right now. So yeah, Leonard, how about you? Where are you?
Sorry, can you just encapsulate the question again? So I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So as I was saying, so like because a lot of the topic that we're focusing on is about game design here in Singapore, right? And while a lot of the experiences we spoken about how some of it, a lot of it is very results oriented, and even though we have we have systems put in place to sort of give you near to real life experiences, like sort of really simulate the working environment kind of thing. We still we still have this problem where it seems that the education system does not encourage
allow for failure.
Yeah, correct. Allow for experimentation is the key word I want to put in, rather than to emphasize the failure of things, but rather encourage experimentation, because it's the fear of failure that discourages in
Yeah, I
experimentation.
think. Okay, if that's my opinion, I think that's disastrous for design as a whole, especially design if you want to compete in international market, where you have to try new things, you have to do something that hasn't been done before. I will state two things first. The first is my design director and my creative director, when I first came on board on this project, when they first gave me the responsibility to both lead and manage the team, was basically said, you will probably fail 90% of the time. Half the decisions will be not great. The other half will probably be argued. 90% of the time you will fail. Learn from that, and we will get the good 10%. Right? So, and he's admitted to himself failing 90% of the time. He's been in the business for a long time. Man has gray hair. Man was around when the first Quake was being made, or Doom was being made. So he told me that. So you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail often. Learn from the failure to your process of failure. And if you can't fail, you're not gonna make good design. The second thing I'll state, as a designer and as a person who thinks, I hate when designers come to me and says, "Oh, this game does this, therefore do this. This game is good and it does this, so therefore we should do this." I hate that. I think that's the laziest form of design. And and if you tell me it's successful because another game did it, then I'm not certain you understand what design process is like. So a lot of design is failure. A lot of design is I did it, it didn't work as I understood it worked. What are my choices and what are the work I have to do to make it work the way I intended, or to reassess where I am with the design and cut it. Right? You're gonna fail a lot. You're often gonna fail. Designing, like majority of the time in design, you're gonna fail 80% of the time before you get to the part where you like. And if you can't live with that, if you don't have the mentality for that, you're not gonna be a competent, or you're not gonna be a good designer. You might be a competent designer working for someone else, but you're not gonna be a good designer.
I mean, that's not great, but yes, that is a very
It's
cool.
not great, and well,
it's a really cool line of
Singaporeans,
thought.
yeah.
So yeah, before I move on to Clive, I do want to like sort of reiterate a standing understanding with everything that goes on with this channel. Every perspective that everyone shares here is very much their own personal perspectives, stemmed out of their own personal experiences. I do try to keep things as objective as possible, and I will challenge points whenever it feels a bit lopsided or biased. But at the end of the day, this is still a conversation. Uh, I, I I think if there is something to be taken out, if it's true, it might be true of the moment. It might not be always true, like universally all the time, because by the time we get to this conversation, and if we do a follow up, it might be several months down the line, and things could very very much improve or change. But the important part is to have these kind of conversations and to put out the thought out there, and that is the point of all of this. So yes, as worrying as it sounds offhand like that, it does. I do hope that someone hears that, and for all we know, they might do something about it. Which is a great segue to Clive. What do you think, and what likelihood is there to see any real change based on your experiences?
I'm not so optimistic on my part. Well, ever since I've been in education, it's kind of made me a bit pessimistic. I think the for me the biggest question I have is really not it's about education itself. Is uh, how courageous is for educators or policymakers to make the change themselves.
Mm.
So basically, it's talk about failure, and you talk about I call it gateways. So let me just share just now about the part about students concerned about grades. Most of them is because they need to meet the minimum requirement to get into DigiPen. So they need to get the grades. So which is irony. It's kind of irony.
Mm.
So it's like you need a gateway to get into a place where you do not need a gateway. So of course, that is policymaker, Ministry of Education. Things that you look at Singapore economy on the whole. There are certain so-called guidelines and there are certain requirements for you to put in place to ensure that you can track the growth industry, or to put some metrics or put some numbers to industry. So it's how comfortable is educators to revisit how these numbers can be generated. So I came up with something before. In the field of education, it is actually something that is possible and in fact has been practiced in some countries. It's about abolishing things like year one, year two, year three. Just do away with all this years promotion. Just talk pure competency. My end of the day is in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Time is not an issue. It's about as long as you can clear all these competency checklist checkbox. I'm able to do this. I'm able to do this consistently. Check all the box. You graduate. Compared to by end of this year, I must graduate. So how willing and how courageous policy makers or so-called higher authorities are willing to invest into this type of system where you graduate only when you're competent.
Be an interesting change
Of course,
because it'll be an interesting change. I was gonna say that my experience in the film school is pretty much like that. There's no years. There is syllabus and projects. So you ramp up eventually how many films you make, and you have a graduating film. They don't really care what your graduating film does, but the target in film school in the States, the goal of most film students isn't grades. They don't care. A's and B's and certain things are just nice to do. What the target is when you do a film is to get it into the circuits. So and you brag more about, like, okay, I made a short film. It's in the New York Film Festival. It's in the Tribeca Film Festival. It's in Austin Film Festival. How many circuits? How many showings do you get your short film through? And who gets to see it? And eventually who gets awards, right? But the first goal is like, how can I build a film that gets into multiple circuits? And if you're in the States, because the States and New York especially, they have a very strong underground horror and underground like sort of horror indie scene, and two different scenes, by the way. It's not indie horror, everything's indie horror, but so you have people who target that, and then there's another one that's really 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 hard, which is comedy, and comedic short films. Doing comedy is really really hard, but doing comedic short films, especially if you're really good in New York, gets you like first pass through many of the normal comedy, what's that, the comedy industry, which is enough of its own problems, but it gets you through and then goes from television. So no one cares about grades within the third year. Like everyone's graduation drive is driven towards making a good enough. Their project drive is to make sure their project is good enough that it can go through circuits. They can go through film festivals. So you do that. You do the work involved in that, and you're not at all after grades. Like grades is not, again, an American thing. It's like it's not at all a concern. And much of that drive, much of that work involved in getting the film towards a thing is networking.
Mhm.
So, like by the third year, most people like me don't really show up for class. We only go occasionally. Most of the time, we are on set somewhere. If we can swing, if we met working cinematographer or working producer or working, like I drove a van around for 2 weeks on on movies you guys probably never heard of and probably never seen. No one's seen them, but I did it right on MTVs that no one has seen, on a Latino MTV where they all sang in Spanish and danced on cars, and I'm like, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but it's work, and I'm meeting people.
Well, all right.
Right. I
sorry.
believe that's in general Singapore. That's what general the government is aiming towards with all their new educational reforms. But the day is whoever planning out the execution of it needs to have real courage and to take some risks, which a lot of them are not willing to take the risk because it may hurt the KPI.
Well, knowing who the education ministers are, because spoiler alert, one of them is my ex-classmate. So, it's going to be
Time
your
to
term
slide.
courageous and him. I don't put in the same sentence.
Time to slide some messages into the DMs.
Well, I'm not saying his name. My name isn't that. He's probably not listening to this chat.
I just would like, I've always been a cautious optimist myself. So yeah, hey dude, give it a try. Who will never know? You'll never know, right? Oh, but okay. So we are running in almost on 2 hours, and Jedi does have does have somewhere else to go. But I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't properly segue over what Jedi is doing right now and the wonderful force that he's putting into motion. Yes, that was a very, very bad attempt at a Star Wars pun.
Oh wow!
I know, right? So
One clap.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
I will take what I can get. So as Leonard put it out just now, a lot of his experiences towards the end, especially when he's doing doing work in the film industry, and he feels like it's relevant, at least towards the games industry as well, is about networking. So I in fact I actually almost want to cut Leonard right off there and like segue straight to Jedi. That is exactly what you're trying to do right now, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think the part that I didn't mention in my general background is that the reason why I even started my own company, other than my sheer willful ignorance and naivety, is also the fact that I was inspired by the work that I did at Civil Service College, which I previously was an intern, and then I was a temp staff, and then now I'm actually an associate trader for games at Civil Service College. And a lot of the work that I do right now, in common with what I did in college, was a lot of games education. We teach people who are not traditionally from the games industry about the basics of game design, and they could turn into game designers. I mean that's great, but I think more importantly, it's because we've been seeing a greater surge of people who are interested in using games in some mediums within the non-game industries. So, for example, we already know about VR simulations, but there's also other things like training workshops. There's also things like art exhibitions that explore art. Just yesterday, I was actually 2 days ago, I was at this art exhibition called the Vicious Fairy Grotto at Stockholm Starts by a group of artists that were expressing their own artistic ideas of how games actually have influenced their lives and how they see it in today's space. Their childhood games versus esports at Dissonance, why there are no gender neutral models when it comes to most games nowadays. You have to pick male or female and the model appears. Very cool ideas that I feel within the games industry we don't think about or express enough, and I believe it's because of the cross application or the collaboration between the games industry and other industries that can give birth to all these cool ideas, right? And I see that as being part of games education. Because at the end of the day, other than applying games in our own industry, if we really, really, really want to thrive as designers, it's also about thinking about how can we apply game design in other spaces as well. And how do we bring other people into the space? Let's be more inclusive, welcome everyone. Games are for everyone, right? So yeah, that's the main motivation why I do what I do.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to collab with you or anything, how could they possibly reach you?
Call me. You can find it on the stall at Junction 8. It says call for good time at 902-8882. Or you can just Google AlterCulture Studios. Or you can add me on Facebook. I'm a very nice person. Or on Discord as well. I go by Jedidiah, and you can of course ask anyone here.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will put links onto your stuff into the description of this video, and if I upload it anywhere else, I will do the same. This is the least I can do. Hopefully it would lead some people over to you guys, and we could see some really, really fun stuff coming out later as well.
Yeah.
Oh, Gwen's already done it, by the way, onto the comment section right now. So
Thanks, Gwen.
so if anybody wants to get your head start with contacting Jedi over there, you can do that right now.
Yay. Good time.
All right, guys. Look, I'll be honest with you guys. Like we are running into 2 hours right now, and the fact is, I think I mentioned to you guys before when we were doing like our initial warm ups and when I first started trying to reach out to some of you guys. We sort of knew that we going into this conversation, we weren't going to say, here is a roadmap. This is your solution. This is your answer. Do this. Game design education is done, solved, right? There is no straightforward answer to these kind of things. That doesn't work that way. This is intended as a conversation and as a discussion, and for what it's worth, I definitely think we have a very, very interesting takeaways from this all. I definitely learned a lot, especially coming from like 3 of you guys. I think the most interesting part is there's at least a 10-year gap nicely equal between all 3 of you guys.
Yeah.
It's about nice.
I say that with enthusiasm. Yeah.
Yeah, so
we work in the games. We need to learn from the younger people. Otherwise, we're just going to be making games.
And vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a huge proponent for the history of games myself. I do think that there's a lot of value in learning about games all the way from Pong all the way to Snakes on the Nokia devices, all the way until the heyday of Chinese bootleg Nintendo games.
Oh yeah.
So yes, I do believe that there's a lot of value in studying and learning all about that. But that's in some points the thesis of this channel. In some point. But it is important to have these conversations, keeping these conversations alive. So thank you guys very much for taking the time to do this with me, especially. I think I'm definitely, I do want to save this conversation and archive it somewhere. Hopefully someday we'll have this on YouTube or something, and and people can watch. And I'm hoping this turns into a series that people can like binge over a really, really, really long weekend.
Yeah. Gwen private messaged me earlier saying that it's probably the irony that most Digipen students wouldn't listen to this podcast because they're too busy doing their GAM projects. So you have that right there.
So here's the thing. One reason why this is done the way it is also so that you could always listen it to whenever you guys want to do something else on the side. That's what that's the best thing about this audio medium podcasting. To be frank, the only reason why I do this on Twitch is because it's more convenient. Everything else seems like a hassle to set up in comparison. So this is just really me being lazy.
Perfect.
All right, guys.
It's fine.
Don't have to bear the search from my unshaven face. It's Sunday and I'm lazy.
All right, guys.
Well,
okay.
I'm here playing your company's game.
one?
I think he's talking to me.
Jared. Yes, Jared. Yes, I'm playing your company's game here. Wow, yeah.
Okay, yes. That's always been a pleasure and a pride. Okay, guys. I think. Do you guys have any last words for any potential graduates or students of the games industry that you'd like to share before we call this session to a close?
Yes. If you are going to sue me, please don't do it yet. I apologize. As I said, and what you said earlier, it's just my experience and my feelings. I'm sure other people might feel differently. I've also been hearing some changes in Digipen, so any Digipen stuff, please do not come for me as well. I apologize. And I really, really want to thank like the two, of the other panels here. Like, as much as I talked my mouth off today, really what we have today is already, it's what made me go into this in the first place. Like, and I'm sure both of you have some impact on how it shaped and formed. And so from one very young generation to the older and the oldest, I thank you very much. And I really hope that I can, I guess, to some extent, do whatever you all have been working on in the past justice in my career. So thank you.
Can you not sound like you're gonna like they're gonna die or something? It sounds like it sounds like a eulogy.
Yeah.
I was being
don't
grateful in
wanna
the moment.
I don't want to talk Jedi stuff, so I don't. Can we just?
It's like Luke.
Oh dear.
It's like you must find your father, Luke. I will not let you down, Master.
Do what you must.
All right. Leonard, how about you? Any words yourself?
I mean, I'm like, what do I say after that? I'm like, just I don't know. Like, everything I'll say is like a platitude. Like, go out there and fail or something. Don't be afraid of. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Design is fun. I like talking about design. Let's talk more about it.
Will do. Clive, what about you? Any last words before we close this session?
A failure usually marks the beginning of something else that may make you successful.
Wise words indeed. Succinct. But yes, once again, thank you guys once again for joining us, including everyone who actually is in the audience. I will be uploading this somewhere, hopefully during the Christmas break. This will be the last quote-unquote weekend stream that I have like properly planned for the year. We'll probably try and start up something again in January, whereby I will be posting it back up onto the Facebook page. So if you've not followed and liked that before yet, please do follow and like that. Oh, Jedi, there's a lot of noise coming in from your one.
Sorry, my bad.
It's alright. Okay, but yes, no worries about that. Just a final wrap up anyways. So yes, do follow and like the Facebook page and or follow this Twitch for further updates. Usually any promo and previews are usually done on the Facebook page, so do follow that Facebook page if you want to get heads up on anything that we do. Alright, with that, thank you guys very much, and let's do this
Thank
again.
you.
I'm really much looking forward to part 2 if we do this again. Yes. Thanks guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
May the force be with you.
Yeah.
Likewise to you and to you.